there's 3 lifts that I really should be focusing on. What should they be? And I was like, well, listen, the 3 lifts that you want to hear aren't going to be the 3 lifts that I'm going to tell you. It's so wild how cyclical fitness and strength training is. And we're looking at the system and how, like, what the athlete's training for. And then we're looking at, okay, we've got to use these specific movements to increase the lifts that have the best carryover. Bodybuilding training is amazing for almost every single athlete, but there's times when you don't need to do it.
Welcome to the Hard Way podcast with Joe Sena, founder and CEO of Spartan Races. We're teaching you how to overcome your obstacles in your life the same way we teach our 10 million plus Spartans to overcome obstacles on the course, with insight from the smartest, most accomplished experts from every corner of the world. Get ready to elevate your life today.
Joe Sena here, CEO and founder of Spartan and host of the Hard Way podcast. I've got the ultimate hard guy on today, Dane Miller. This guy is a master coach, Olympic weightlifting. If you're going to go for gold medal, have a gold medal, you call Dane Miller. Is that fair?
Yeah, that is, I like that. Thanks a lot, Joe.
So how do we get strong? I mean, I found myself back when I was in my teens, 20s, I was doing the bench pressing, the squats, the lat pull down machine, and everybody wanted to be like Arnold Schwarzenegger. But then I got into, endurance. And before you know it, a decade goes by and you're not throwing around weights. And now every expert in the world is saying you got to be strong if you want to live long.
I think that's an interesting question because I think the first thing that you're posing is like, what's your goal? Is it going to be a sports related goal? Is it going to be longevity related? And I have an acronym that I use I say essay. Basically, is it endurance-based, strength-based, speed-based, or explosiveness? And I sort of look at those 4 things, and then based off of a sport or based off of somebody who's a longevity individual, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, okay, for how you pose the endurance aspect, I'll put you through and look at, okay, you want to run a marathon, let's say. Well, if you want to run a marathon, this is the percentage of training that will be in the gym, and this is the goals that you'll have when you're in the gym. And that percentage of training, because you're in an endurance-based sport, will be different. We're still going to be doing resistance-based training, but it's to sort of be that supplement to all the endurance work that you'll be doing. So I sort of look through each person's goals based off of how much of those 4 key aspects, and it's endurance, speed, strength, and explosiveness, that I see as like what you're going to be focusing on when you're doing resistance-based training.
But you're suggesting, I think, no matter what area you're focused on, resistance-based training plays a role.
Yeah, I think the magnitude is going to be different for a marathon runner relative to somebody who I'd say, like, let's say polar opposite would be a shot putter. The magnitude of resistance-based training is going to be different, and the purpose of it would also be different. I would look at a marathoner's resistance-based work might be, we might still do 1 session of explosiveness and speed-based training, and then the other resistance stuff is going to be based around improving mobility. Maybe there's a problem area with like a lower back pain or something like that, or maybe shin issues, something like that. Maybe even knees as well. So we might do something around the hips. So it's almost more of like mobility for that individual who'd be the marathoner. Whereas that shot putter, it's like, all right, we got to get them extraordinarily strong with absolute strength and to be as extraordinarily explosive as possible. And the endurance component for that individual is really going to be in the circle when they're doing their technical work. Whereas the marathoner, their endurance work is their actual sport.
And when I was really leaning into long distance stuff, what I found that it rose all boats for me. So I could lift more weight. I could spend more time in the gym. I could run for does that make sense that everything got better?
How long was your work? Like a 50 mile, or we're talking marathon?
More than that. So when I was training for really long endurance, my Saturdays were, I had to be somewhere between 8 and 12 hours carrying weight out in the mountains, right? That was my training. If I woke up on a Sunday after doing that and I was ready to do it again, I knew I was ready for anything. And then during the week, I'd be running, I'd be lifting, I'd be doing yoga. I was doing it all 2 to 3 hours a day. Saturday was a big day. Depending on how I felt Sunday when I woke up, was I like I don't ever want to do this again? Or did I feel like then I knew I was ready? But I was like, wow, I'm getting stronger, even though I'm not lifting the way I did in my teens. I'm doing, so I don't know if that makes, maybe because I was getting lighter. I don't know.
I think it could be a factor of you're getting lighter, but also I would argue like your work capacity was higher. So you were in the gym. So the closer you're pushing, let's say, and I don't know how much you were pushing load, like, let's say just throw out an easy lift for people to understand. Are you pushing, that deadlift for weight or that deadlift for reps? And I could definitely see a carryover where it's like, all right, before you would start doing this, let's say you test your 80% deadlift and you get it for 7 reps. Well, as you would increase your volume of those long 8 to 12 hour days on a Saturday, let's say 8 to 12 weeks later, you're adapted and you can do that same 80% load for 10 to 12 reps. I could 100% see that happening, because I think if you can maintain what you're doing in the gym while increasing the other work, you will see, once you get through like that initial shock period of adding in that volume, I think you will see like that has a good carryover. And I think a lot of strength coaches actually struggle with that. They almost talk to like an ultra marathoner and they just want them, they wish they weren't ultra marathoners. They're like, no, why do you do this? And they'll want them to train like a linebacker. And it's like, that's not their sport. Let's train them for their specific sport. And then we will actually see like, hey, this person is responding really well to the same amount of volume and they're increasing their work elsewhere. And I could see that happening.
What question for you? I'm seeing a lot of controversy around this idea. Back in the 50s, Dan Laurie, Jack LaLanne leads up to Arnold Schwarzenegger, doing lots of muscle specific work, curls, bench, etc. And now there's a lot of controversy around like systems approach. So you're moving multiple muscles through resistance training. What are your thoughts, like functional type movements? What are your thoughts there?
It's so wild how cyclical fitness and strength training is. And I think partially it has a lot to do with research. It's like this, you'll see there'll be a time when people will be fans of weightlifting, of Olympic weightlifting. So doing a snatch or doing a clean. And then some paper will come out that the clean didn't improve the 20-yard sprint of an elite soccer player. So then for the next 5 years, it's like, oh, we don't need to do these cleans. We should just run sprints. And there's a paper that says, resisted sprints don't help with 20s, using the same example. So they'll stop doing resisted sprints. And I think that my take on all that is like, if I'm looking at it through the approach that we have, is we're looking at the system and how an athlete, like what the athlete's training for. And then we're looking at, okay, we've got to use these specific movements to increase the lifts that have the best carryover. And I think that that's the one downfall, is like people who will say that you just need to do single joint exercises, or people who say you need to do functional, they don't have a truly holistic system, because they're not usually training athletes. They're usually just training people online, which is fine for financial gain. That's great. But if you're not actually practicing this day to day in the environment, you don't really get that direct feedback. And I think that that's where it's like, dude, bodybuilding training is amazing for almost every single athlete, but there's times when you don't need to do it. Weightlifting exercises are absolutely amazing, and there's times that we don't need to do it. And it's the same thing with, the deadlift or the back squat or the bench press. These are all amazing lifts, but there's sports and there's times that they're not necessary because they might not transfer the best. And I think that there's always this, it's much more of a gray area that you've got to sort of wade through. And instead of just having this hook off of Instagram tell you like this one thing, and then you buy into that for 6 weeks until you see the next hook. I think that's the thing that we've got to be aware of.
What would you say stands the test of time? What are the 3 go-to exercises? I mean, is it squat, bench, deadlift? Like, what are the 3 exercises everybody should be doing?
So this is really interesting, because I don't know if you've seen these videos on YouTube, but there was like a Polish/Soviet weightlifting team video from like the early 70s. And I was talking with some of my strength coaches here about it. And I said, these guys are going out for a run, and then they're doing plyometrics, and then they're showing them doing weightlifting movements. Then they're doing benches and dips. And I was like, this is like, the 70s. And if you didn't know that they were weightlifters, to me, it's like, they look like the quintessential athlete. It's like you see a wrestler. A wrestler is somebody who's got great strength, they're explosive, and they have great endurance. And I think that when you can identify those types of movement patterns in someone, that they look healthy, they're moving well, I think it really comes back to, and to answer your question as directly as possible, I think for me, it's this is another weird one. Is that my son last night, he goes, Dad, if there's 3 lifts that I really should be focusing on, what should they be? And I was like, well, listen, the 3 lifts that you want to hear aren't going to be the 3 lifts that I'm going to tell you. So if you ask me, if you're a shot putter or you're a football player or you're a wrestler, I'm going to tell you that you should do so, like let's say an incline bench or a flat bench, and you could argue maybe a pull-up for the wrestler instead of a bench. But then I'm going to tell you should do a front squat, and you're going to tell me you don't like to put it on your chest because you don't have the mobility, and then I'll just say do a cross arm front squat, and then I'm going to tell you to do a snatch to increase your mobility in your shoulders and in your hip, and you're going to tell me you don't want to do it because it's hard to get really good at it. It's hard to have the technique. Where I'm going with that is I think oftentimes, somebody like a front squat transfers phenomenally. And it doesn't mean you have to do them super heavy, but a wrestler responds really well to front squats and they end up having really good mat strength. They have good back strength, good mobility. I would argue a bench press or a pull-up. It's like you're doing literally, like you should be able to master doing a pull-up if you want to be athletic. And I would argue something explosive with some type of control. So either like a deadlift, a faster deadlift, or a snatch or a clean, I think are also things that sort of that they carry that test of time where it's like, if you see someone who can clean, let's just say 300 pounds, it's very likely that they're fast. It's very likely that they're strong with their squat. It's very likely they can jump. It's very likely that they probably are able to do pull-ups. And so those are the movements that we see that transfer really, really well, but they're also the movements that are harder to do.
What about lateral movements? Like when I hear those exercises, which kind of fit in the box of what I grew up on, right? Like there's not a lot of torque and twisting. And what would you recommend there?
So if we're testing wrestlers or if we're testing, let's use linebackers, tennis players as another great example. I think the easiest test that we see carry over well is something like a shuttle, like a 5-10-5 shuttle works really well as the test. Movements that we see carry over well, something simple, getting kids to learn how to skip, lateral skips, high knees laterally. We'll do a lot of depth drops on a lateral. So you'll stand on a box, you'll drop to the side, and you'll do like a single leg bound forward. Those are movements that I see carry over really, really well. As far as like foundational historic movements, I honestly would say the shuttle. And one thing that I'm lucky with is, we have a hill near our gym that we will run on quite a bit. It's like one of the best things to improve your speed laterally is literally doing like karaoke up the hill and then turning and switching sides. So doing that, and then you could even bring in, we train a lot of wrestlers and we train a lot of throwers. So we're doing a lot of like walking rotational lunges, and things like that can carry over extraordinarily well, even with a kettlebell as well to the actual sports.
Yeah, I saw a movement where you take a barbell, typical 45-pound barbell, put it on your hips and start walking and twisting the barbell back and forth. Is that a movement? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I actually call that the Krauser lunge. And I think, we've seen that a lot in combat sports. We've seen a lot with throwers. Ryan Krauser, I think, is the one. So he's a world record holder in the shot put that has like put it out there and probably gotten the most eyeballs on him doing it. He's the 6'6", 6'7", 330-pound monster, 3-time Olympic champion, doing, walking lunges with that barbell. And it's like, that's a really, really good way to increase the strength in your hip and your abs and your shoulders. And at the same time, training ranges through those mobile patterns. I think it's absolutely fantastic.
How's the reverse hyper, which is a new device for me over the last year?
I will go out and I would say that we have never seen anyone not be able to do a reverse hyper. Like genuinely in the last, I would say we got a reverse hyper in 2013. I don't think that there's a single movement, maybe GHD, but sometimes GHDs people will struggle if they have a little tweaked back. I don't think there's an exercise that's better for like one, rehabbing lower back, two, strengthening the entire posterior chain, and three, even getting like younger athletes to learn how to like sort of. So we'll train this thought process of like when you raise your legs up, like push through your gut. Like we try to teach this hollow position where you push through your belly as you're raising your legs to arch a little bit. And then we want to see that round and then arch. When these kids learn how to do this, you can immediately see them go over and pull with a more arched back or even a slightly rounded back if they're deadlifting. And I think that the reverse hyper is, I trained under a guy who was a Soviet. He was an Olympic champion himself. His name was Anatoly Bondarchuk. And we would do leg-based reverse hypers, not with weight, but just our body weight. Sometimes we'd put a dumbbell in our feet. I never had a program that we didn't have it. And since that time, I believe they're like one of the absolute best movements that you can do.
Explain it to folks. Not everybody knows what a reverse hyper is.
Okay, so you're thinking about, let's say, and we'll just say like a flat table. So you're on a flat table and you're laying on your chest, and right around where the crease of your hip is, your hip would be at like a 90-degree angle relative to your torso. And so your hip's sort of hanging there while you're laying with your chest at this 90 degrees on a table. And then what tends to happen is it's almost like a swing. And I think that's the interesting part, is that you're using, I guess it's technically not a trebuchet, but you almost, if you visualize that look of like a catapult. And at times, and what a lot of coaches will actually teach is that when it gets loaded, you can get a little bit of a swing into it. And what ends up happening is that if you decelerate like right before end range, you can actually get hip flexion as your legs come under, and that'll really lengthen your erectors, your lower back, your glutes. And then you get tension to swing back up, and you want to try and squeeze all the way back up at the top. And so the whole goal while you're doing that is to have minimal knee bend as well. So in the case of doing the reverse hyper for lower back strength, you want to try to have your legs almost fully locked out. And then what's crazy is that when kids first get on them, that we get, and even older clients, if we have older, like we call them athletic fitness clients, when they come into the gym and they start to use them, their hamstrings and back, it's like you can see the cobwebs just blasting out of their body as they're doing the reverse hyper because of the lengthening of the hamstrings, the lower back, the glutes. And then even as they arch more, they start to improve their posture as well.
It's so funny you just said that. I'm going to have you talk to my son tonight. He's 17 and I have him doing it. And he's like, last night he said, I'm not doing it. I said, why? He said, I don't want him wrestling. My back is bothering. I said, of course it's bothering you because you're not used to doing that exercise. So if you're willing, I'm going to have you talk to him on FaceTime. When he sees all your muscles, he might listen to you. He doesn't listen to me.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm all down for that. That's awesome. That's actually interesting because the other thing with wrestlers is that they're always in this stance here, so they're kyphotic all the time. And if you can teach them to get that arch at the top, now, they'll still be in this position because they like that defensive position, especially if they're Russians tend to have a more orthodox arch back and Americans tend to round with their stance. And I think you'll see, even if that stays his stance, it's still going to help strengthen his upper back. And that's also where you'll see front squats start to improve that posture as well with wrestlers. It'll just try to, in snatches, honestly, are one of the best things to try and just outside of the room, improve that upper back position.
How do people find you?
So they can find me. I have a YouTube channel, Garage Strength. On Instagram, we're at Garage Strength. I also have my personal Instagram is at Ghostface D Miller. We also have a strength training app known as Peak Strength. And so this is where we put in a lot of our information around how we train. So if like you're a football player or wrestler, you can actually download Peak Strength and go in and select that you're a wrestler, and even put in there position specific stuff when you're playing your season, in season, out of season, so you can get programs specifically built towards what your goals are. And really that's the main thing that we do. We also have an on-site gym here. So it's like we've created this online ecosystem to sort of roll together with our on-site gym here in southeastern Pennsylvania. We're sort of in the middle of I'm literally looking at the middle of a cornfield behind the camera. So
No wonder you have wrestlers. You're in Pennsylvania. I love it.
yeah, exactly.
I might come see you. I got to go to one of my son's tournaments in the next 3-4 weeks. I might come try to come shake your hand. All right, for the Spartan folks out there, Tough Mudder participants, trail runners, we got a big ecosystem. Let's leave them with something around the three exercises. Would you say same 3 exercises, that front squat, that's some sort of a snatch and a bench?
Let's do this. Let's go pull up for them specifically. I think they're probably going to do more pulling. So let's go pull ups, front squats, single leg squats, like a Bulgarian, but we call them single leg squats, and we want that back knee to touch a pad so they get a little bit more range. And I think a lot of endurance athletes in Spartan Tough Mudders is like, you'll see the trunk gets more stable when they have that split position. And then with that knee coming down, it'll lengthen their hips and it'll strengthen their glutes, and they're going to see a lot of benefit endurance wise when they're late in a race and they're starting to really, really get tired. They're going to start to feel stronger, just as you mentioned earlier in the beginning of the podcast, where it's like, you'll see these weird carryovers that you weren't really expecting. And that's one of those lifts, that single leg squat, that can carry over a lot to endurance training.
I love it. And then the last question I have is, most folks out there, most of the world, forget about the country, they just can't get their act together. They can't get in a gym. They can't go outside and go for a walk or a run. How are you getting people? I mean, I'm sure gold medalists, the folks that you're training, are having the same kind of motivational issues or discipline issues. Like, what do you say? How do you get them through it?
I think the biggest thing is to take it one step at a time and realize that it's relative to you. And I think that's the big thing that we offer here, is that we have a really, really strong culture, same as what you have fostered and created through Spartan. Is like, when you have a culture that's set up in a community that's set up, it lays out, and I think culture is really defined by expectations, accountability, and support. And the thing is like that what I try to communicate is like, this is what you can expect from me as a coach. This is what I'm going to expect from you as an athlete or as somebody who's coming in with their fitness. And I think that it's like establishing those expectations and then having someone help you be accountable. So for somebody who's not inside that specific culture, it's like, just take the first step, and the first step might be 5-minute workout. And I think that's the one thing, is that my mom was in this issue. She's like, well, I'm only doing 10 sets of body weight squats. It only takes me about 15 minutes. I'm like, Mom, you're like, that's great. That's a good start. And it's like, don't discount a 10-minute workout. Don't discount a 15-minute workout, because if you do that for 6 months, all of a sudden that 10-minute, 15-minute workout is 60 minutes. And I'm a big framework guy. We'll do a framework of 24/4. Okay, so if you can give me 20 weeks and you train 4 days a week and you get 4 hours in that week, okay, for 20 weeks, just say, I'm going to do this for 20 weeks. And I know it sounds like it's a lot, but just try it for 20 weeks. And each week you just hit that notch. And now all of a sudden you have that framework and you have those goals that you can work towards. And even if you don't want to do it for 4 hours a week, just start for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and do it 4 days a week. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, it's 3 months later and you're halfway there, and you didn't really even blink an eye. But we oftentimes we'll judge ourselves like, oh, it's only a 20-minute workout. Well, 20 minutes is better than nothing. And I think that's an attitude that a lot of people could really adopt to get moving.